Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian. Greg, thanks very much for your time. I guess the first and broadest question is we had this incredible ability from Ukraine to defy the odds and shift the Russian offensive away from the capital. Can they do the same in the east? Is that possible, do you think?
Well, Tom, to tell you the truth, my mind has been a bit focused on Solomon Islands today, but the Ukrainians have shown a remarkable tactical ability to outsmart the Russians. It's much harder for them in this context because the Russian supply lines are much shorter, because this territory abuts Russia. The ground is more open, so it's harder for the Ukrainians to get up close to the Russian tanks with their short-range weapons. And Ukraine itself is experiencing a level of fatigue and exhaustion. But certainly it's incumbent on every friend of democracy around the world to supply the Ukrainians with every weapon system imaginable so that they can defeat the Russians, because unless the Russians are defeated, they will be back for more in due course, I think.
Yeah, you can understand the fatigue, but as you say, let's just hope they get the help they can get. What an extraordinary situation that they're facing, because even the successful defence leaves so much devastation and bloodshed. Let's turn to the Solomon Islands then. The deal is done, from what we know. Is it set in stone though? Sogavare, if we look at history, doesn't necessarily last a long time in power. Do you think it can be undone?
I think it can be undone, but it's extremely difficult. I do think this is an astonishingly bad day for Australia. This is a gravely bad day for Australia's national interests. It also represents a failure of policy for Australia. Now, it's reasonable for the Morrison government to argue that Solomon Islands are a very difficult country to influence and no one could have done any better. That may be true, so I'm not making a party political point. But the bottom line is Australian policy was for this deal not to happen, and the deal has happened. We spend vastly more money than China does in the Solomon Islands, but they've got the influence and we haven't. Now, they have certain advantages over us. They can put money in politicians' pockets directly. We can't do that. Nonetheless, you'd say Australia, the United States and New Zealand are in a Cold War strategic competition in the South Pacific against China. And China, deploying much less money and without the proximity and without the history, has clearly outplayed us in this episode. And this sort of agreement has led to Chinese bases and military presence elsewhere in the world. This is really a gravely serious moment for Australian national security.
And when we look at perhaps what might have helped in the past, and indeed what might still help in the future in terms of other countries in the region, what's being put forward today by some security experts, what about Australian bases elsewhere? Yes, there's been the talk of getting one up in Manus. It seems to be on the go slow, but it has the dual benefit of showing Australia's serious about its role in the region. And if you're talking about economic benefit, you know, that can be huge for wherever the actual base is positioned.
Well, that's absolutely right. So I tend to agree with the criticism that we should have sent the foreign minister. I mean, what on earth are we doing if we don't send the foreign minister to this crisis? What on earth could the foreign minister be doing that was more important? And if you're going to fail, at least fail after giving it the full pitch. I certainly think we ought to have facilities and bases in the South Pacific where we can. So this base in Manus was announced a few years ago with tremendous fanfare that it was going to project power into the region and the United States was going to jointly develop it with us. If you look at what they've done so far, they've repaired a chapel and they're building a jetty facility that is so tiny that even our offshore patrol vessels, which don't carry any weapons anyway beyond a kind of a pop gun, can't be serviced by the jetty. So we ought to be looking to have bases and presences in the region, in the South Pacific, where we can. I mean, it's no good just talking about a Pacific step up and all the rest of it if you don't actually get the results. Our military seems to be very reluctant to serve overseas in a basing capacity. I mean, there's one joke in Manus Island is that they kept the jetty so small so that no Australian ship could ever be based there. But we need to be crawling all over the South Pacific, and we're being significantly outplayed by an agile and adept China. The other point I'd make to you is the Americans have not had a Solomon Islands embassy for nearly 30 years. Yet we constantly hear that we are the Americans' best friends, their most intimate ally, that no nation has more influence with them than we do. Yet it would have been enormously in our interest for the Americans to have an embassy there. We have failed in talking them into having one until now, when the deal with China is already done.
It does seem as though the movement and the urgency has come too late. We'll see. Just on the French presidential election as well, Greg, I know this is on your radar. Yes, we have Emmanuel Macron as the strong favourite. The format, of course, is this final runoff with him and Marine Le Pen. It's still a fascinating contest because the fact she's in this final two and any sort of a chance is, well, significant, isn't it?
It sure is. And both the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit vote showed us that the polls often get these things wrong. She is going to be much closer than she was in 2017. In 2002, when her father made the second round, he won 17% of the vote in the second round. 5 years ago, she won 34% of the vote. She will probably be in the mid or high 40s this time and may just sneak through. If she does sneak through to a victory, this will be a bigger blow to the EU than Brexit was. She has detoxified her party to a large extent. She's a different type of nationalist, though, to Boris Johnson. So she and Johnson were both against the EU, but she's against NATO. She's against American influence. In the past, she's been quite pro-Putin, although we ought to record that she has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. She is a welfare populist, welfare for everybody, lower the pension age. And if she wins, of course, there'll be massive civil disturbance in France. So we're on the point of something that might be quite astonishing. And in any event, her ideas have come very much into the mainstream, much more than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, detoxifying is probably an interesting word. I remember learning about her father actually in French at high school in the 90s, and it seemed a long way to go for him to be any sort of actual presidential candidate. And here we are, slowly evolving. Greg, great to get your thoughts today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom.